Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today is a huge day for India. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, or HAL, has just started commercially producing cryogenic engines. That's one of the most complex, most difficult rocket technologies in the entire world. But what if I told you that the basic idea behind this incredible cutting-edge tech isn't new at all? Okay, let's dive into this, because we're about to take a journey from today's high-tech labs all the way back to the pages of ancient Indian epics. This quote right here from Dr. Sidindra S. G's research, it really sets the stage perfectly. It's a bold claim, right? It's suggesting that what we're cheering about as a 21st century achievement actually has deep, deep roots in a knowledge system from thousands of years ago. The whole idea is that these ancient stories weren't just stories. They were embedded with scientific principles, basically waiting for us to decode them. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. This is the core comparison we're talking about today. On one side, you have the cryogenic engine, the absolute pinnacle of modern aerospace engineering. And on the other, the Varunastra, a legendary divine weapon from the Mahabharata. The whole argument here is that these two, well, they're not as different as you might think. One is the machine, and the other, maybe, just maybe, was the original blueprint. All right, Section 1. Decoding the divine weapons. So let's tackle the big question head on. How could a mythical weapon possibly be a scientific blueprint? Well, according to this line of thinking, we have to start seeing these stories as something more than just fantasy. The argument is that they're actually codes, brilliant narratives designed to preserve incredibly complex scientific truths for future generations to find. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. This slide breaks down the core idea. The theory is that the Varunastra wasn't just some kind of magic water weapon. In this context, Varuna is interpreted as a code for oxygen, and Udana, which literally means upward moving energy, is seen as the perfect description for hydrogen. You combine the two, and what do you get? An explosive release of energy and just massive thrust. Sound familiar? It should. The research argues this is the exact principle of a modern cryogenic engine. So, if we slap a modern definition on it based on this research, you can see the Varunastra as a kind of Vedic code for cryogenic propulsion. It's a concept-level description of what happens when you combine supercooled oxygen and hydrogen to generate incredible power. From this point of view, the science wasn't just hinted at, it was literally embedded right there in the name. And get this. It wasn't seen as a one-off thing either. The same logic is applied to what might be the most famous astra of them all, the Brahmastra. It's described as the ultimate weapon, right? Well, its principles of a controlled, absolutely massive energy release are said to have parallels in modern concepts like nuclear fission. So the argument is, this is a pattern. Seriously advanced science coded inside a story. So that brings us to Section 2. The Sutra of Science. Okay, so where did these ideas even come from? The argument is they weren't just floating around in epic stories. They were actually built on foundational scientific texts known as sutras, which laid the groundwork for principles we now use in modern physics. Now, just take a look at this timeline. A rocket flies because of the law of action and reaction. We all learned that in school, right? We attribute it to Newton's third law from the 17th century. But the research points out that nearly 2,000 years earlier, Maharshi Kanada described a remarkably similar principle in his Vaisheshika Sutra. The suggestion here is pretty mind-blowing. A foundational concept of rocketry was clearly articulated centuries before it was ever formalized in the West. So why hydrogen? Why was Udana, this upward-moving energy, so important in this whole interpretation? This chart gives us the modern answer. When it comes to rockets, fuel efficiency is everything. And hydrogen, well, it has the highest calorific value of any element, period. It gives you the most bang for your buck, the most thrust for its weight. The argument is that the Vedic sages didn't just pick a random concept. They correctly identified the most potent source of upward-moving energy there is. Okay, Section 3, Myth becomes a machine. So we've talked about the scientific principles. But how do you actually get from a concept in a story to a real functioning machine? This is where the research points to some of the most amazing engineering parallels. Here's the kicker. Hydrogen is a gas. To pack enough of it into a rocket to do anything useful, you have to turn it into a liquid. And that means you have to cool it down to a mind-boggling minus 253 degrees Celsius. That's why it's called cryogenic. It means supercooled. It is a monumental engineering challenge. And that leads to some very practical questions. First off, once you light this incredibly powerful fuel on fire, how on earth do you control it? You can't just have a giant explosion. You need precise regulation to turn all that raw power into controlled, usable thrust. And here's another key question, one that comes directly from the descriptions in the epics. If these Astras are releasing so much energy, why don't they just incinerate the person who launches them? It's a critical engineering problem we still face today. How do you manage all that heat? And this slide is the payoff. It shows how the research maps these narrative elements directly to modern engineering. Those mantras that were used to control the Astra, they're interpreted as the conceptual equivalent of today's turbopumps and fuel regulators. And that protective energy shield? Get this, it's compared to regenerative cooling, a system where the supercooled liquid hydrogen actually circulates around the combustion chamber, acting as a real-life shield to stop the engine from melting itself. Incredible! So what's the big takeaway here? This brings us to our final and maybe the most important point in this whole analysis, that these stories were designed to be more than just entertainment. They were a sophisticated, brilliant system of education. The idea is this. When a student hears the story of an Astra, it's not just a myth. It's a code for scientific principles. It's a tool, a visual that triggers reasoning and makes you ask questions. How would that actually work? How do you stop it from overheating? The myth becomes a physics problem. When you look at it this way, it's an ancient and unbelievably effective form of STEM education. And that's why, according to this perspective, achievements like Hale's new engine aren't a break from the past, but they're actually the latest chapter in a very, very long story. It suggests there's this continuum of knowledge. So when a modern cryogenic engine is metaphorically called a Varunastra, it's seen as a powerful acknowledgement of this deep heritage, connecting ancient insight to modern engineering. So the final thought I want to leave you with is this. Maybe we should look at these epic stories, not just as memories of a forgotten past, but as a challenge to our imagination, to our intellect, and maybe, just maybe, as blueprints for the future. Thank you for joining us on The Explainer.